Hello, Jessica, and welcome to our to the Dog Summit. I'm so happy you're actually joining us in turning puppy challenges into joy, right? So we're today here to make first-time dog ownership easy and make it joyful. So it was actually my intention when I put this Dog Summit together. How do we make dog ownership something that more people want to do? Right? A lot of people want a dog, but they're kind of shying away because of some very practical items or issues. And I really want to make sure that we help people have a great start, because I think dogs deserve families, but also families deserve dogs. And I'm actually sure that this is the right order. I think life is much richer, especially a child's life as well, if they can grow up with dogs. And there are lots of misunderstandings around that. And there's lots of key items like nutrition or training or behavior and wellness. And I would love to hear your expertise. You're an expert, especially in nutrition. And why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience?
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm so excited and honored to be here, Peggy, to be joining your masterclass series and helping people better understand their dogs or getting a new dog, because just like you said, it is so enriching to our lives to share them with dogs. So yes, thank you so much. My name is Jessica Fisher. I am dual certified in canine nutrition, also in feline nutrition, and a certified holistic pet health coach. And my passion really is in raising pets naturally, because that is, in my opinion, when we look to nature, when we follow nature's guidance and guidelines, we are setting ourselves and our pets up for success for a lifetime. And it's never too late to start. And I'm just always ready to tell people about the power of feeding real food to our pets.
Yeah. I think nutrition is one of the key pillars we can do for our dog. So, right. So how did you get to that profession? How do you get into this kind of field? Because that's interesting, right?
It is. And pet health coaching is pretty new. There aren't that many of us yet, but we are growing. It's very similar to how in the human world, we have health coaches in the human world. There's a huge disconnect. And I know here in the States where I'm at, there is a huge disconnect between pet parent and veterinarian. We have a crisis going on in veterinary medicine. We don't have enough veterinarians. They're burnt out. They're retiring early. They sadly have the highest suicide rate of any career. It's really, really sad. And I think a lot of that is because there is so much disconnect, and pet parents, and I've been there. I've been a pet parent since the day I left my parents' house at 18. I've been there where I overutilize my veterinarian, and I try to, because I didn't know any better. So we utilize them for things that they're not actually trained in, nutrition being one of those key things that they just don't have much education. And there are some that will go above and beyond and decide to educate themselves more on it outside of their, 4 or 6 years, however long they spend in school learning veterinary medicine, but it is a specialty. And so for me, we were just chatting a little bit about this. If I go all the way back to my early 20s, I did a lot of rescue work with cats specifically, and I did TNR with feral cat colonies. So we would actually go out into feral cat colonies, trap them, take them in to be neutered and vaccinated, and then releasing them back out. And while that is very rewarding, it's also very exhausting. Yeah, and then it's really amazing. It's a really amazing thing to do for feral cats, but you also really notice that you don't even have that pet at home with you, thanking you and loving you, and so it can be really hard.
Yeah.
That for me kind of transitioned into dog training, because I really wanted to, being in the rescue world for so long, I wanted to find a way to keep animals out of the shelter system. And so I thought dog training would be a good way to do that. We can go in and we can make this relationship between the pet parent and the pet so much easier, so much nicer. We're not, hopefully not having all these dogs being relinquished for behavioral issues.
Kind of right? Yeah, that's a good approach. And what happened?
So I started doing that and I like it. I will still do it sometimes, usually because, there are just people out there circulating my name and getting referrals. But I found the power of fresh food with my own dogs and cats eventually. And I started implementing that with my dog training clients just because I thought it was so amazing, the results that I was getting with my dogs. And to be more specific, I had adopted a dog who was literally a hot mess. When I adopted her, she had had puppies that had all passed away. She developed a mammary cancer. All of the teeth were rotting out of her mouth. She was terrified of men. She was terrified of being out in the open. She would walk along walls. And so it took a lot of patience and care and love and veterinary care to get her back to a good, stable place. And I was just, I think, on a whim, looking to be more maybe nurturing to them and started cooking some food for them. And I hadn't given up their kibble. I hadn't given up their dry food. I was supplementing with fresh food, with real food, with meats and vegetables. And her seizures went away. And it was 6 months later, and I looked at my husband and I was like, when was the last time Claire had a seizure, right? And
was she epileptic? Jessica, was it epileptic fit or was it just a seizure?
They were just seizures. My veterinarian, especially combined with the behavioral issues, the being scared and being afraid of men, she was terrified of feet. So my vet thought that she may have been kicked and had some head trauma that triggered these.
All right.
So, and I am by no means saying that if you have a dog with seizures, just feed them fresh food and it's all going to go away. That's not what I'm saying at all. There's a whole lot more to the story. But I noticed that and I'm like, there's something here. So I started helping my dog training clients transition their dogs onto real food. We're not doing any more of the bags off the grocery store shelves kind of thing. And they didn't really need me anymore. A lot of the behavioral issues that they were seeing that they had hired me for to begin with were, I'm sure, a combination of the tips and tricks that I had been teaching them, the positive reinforcement that they were implementing, and also the fresh food. They just didn't need me anymore, which was really beautiful and amazing and heartwarming, but also okay, now I need to find something else to do.
So you do see a connection. That's interesting. You do see a connection between behavior and nutrition.
Absolutely. And
so how do you see that?
Well, it can be a number of different ways. And if we look at us, if we look at ourselves and we look at what eating highly processed food regularly does to us, we're grouchy. We are much quicker to have a temper, to go off on somebody. We don't feel good. We have brain fog. And some of these things we can't necessarily, some of these things we can't necessarily have our veterinarians test in our dogs, like brain fog, but we know that it can happen. We know, and there's also a lot of research around the fact that most pet foods that you buy off of the shelf, especially the ones that are ultra processed, the nutrition isn't coming from the food. The nutrition is coming from synthetic vitamins and minerals that are being added back in to make it quote unquote balanced, depending on where you live. And our bodies just don't recognize those. Our dogs' bodies, our cats' bodies, they don't recognize those in the same way they do nutrition from whole food sources. And we can get way more involved into the nutrition aspect that way, but our bodies need real food. They need not just nutrients, but all of the co-nutrients surrounding those nutrients from the fresh foods to actually metabolize and work properly in the body. So one huge thing that so many people, for whatever reason, I don't know, have not put together. A lot of us in the what I like to call the healthy pet space, we know it. It's like duh, so obvious to us. But we've been so susceptible to marketing for so many decades. Kidney issues, for example, bladder issues. Dry food is the absolute worst thing for that. We need a high moisture diet. We need to be putting moisture into our animals. And so it's like, no wonder so many of our dogs and cats are suffering with kidney disease, especially later on in life.
Especially also cats, right? That's a huge issue in cats anyway, because they don't drink. And so if they have a dry food, that makes it even worse. Yeah. That's interesting. So, I mean, what do you say to people who would say, I have been feeding my dog on a let's say super premium kibble, and he lived for 16 years happily ever after. I mean, what's the counter against that?
A lot of people say that. And a lot of people look back to their dogs that they grew up with. And a lot of people look back to the dogs their parents grew up with. And it's like, it takes time. Our dogs are so well adapted to being nutritionally abused that it takes time for these things to show up. And it takes generation after generation after generation of being fed poorly for it to actually show in what we call epigenetics into their genes that are passed down from generation to generation to be less able to handle stress on the body, whether that's toxins or poor diet, whatever it may be.
Yes.
So a dog that lived 30 years ago was more adept to be able to handle the nutritional abuse. Whereas a dog today who is from a line of dogs who maybe have been eating ultra processed food for 5, 6, 7+ generations, have been over vaccinated for 4 or 5 generations at this point, they are not as well adept to be able to handle all of the abuse and all of the stress that their body is under. And I was just talking to a number of veterinarians, actually, because November is Pet Cancer Awareness Month here in the States. And one of the things that we were talking about is the fact that we generally look at whatever is happening in human health, and say that's also basically what's happening in our dog's health. So 1 in every 2 dogs by the time they turn 10 years old, if they make it to 10 years old, are going to be faced with a cancer diagnosis here in the United States.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of mirroring what's happening in the human health world. But what's really interesting is that cancer is not a reportable disease in veterinary medicine. There's no reporting database. So there are a lot of veterinarians, and now that we have started to see the field of veterinary oncology come forth in the States specifically, that they think the number is actually a whole lot greater than that. Potentially up to 5 times greater than that.
Wow,
which
that's crazy.
Terrifying.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
So when you're saying, Jessica, fresh food, it's really interesting. What is fresh food, right? Because there's obviously also fresh. I mean, there are actually brands in the US, especially now, which are making, they're out there taking the market by storm, costing the kibble producers a lot of market share. Is that fresh food? Or if you talk fresh food, what do you consider fresh food?
There's a huge hierarchy of what fresh food is and what processed food is. Pretty much everything you buy commercially is going to be processed in some way, shape, or form. If we get really nitpicky about cooking, if we get really nitpicky about freezing, that's a processing, right? Fermentation is a process. It can still be fresh, considered fresh food, and be fermented or frozen. But, and the reason why I say fresh food is because for a very long time, I was a raw feeding advocate, and I still am.
Okay.
I'm very much a proponent of feeding dogs and cats a raw food diet, but it is so much less divisive to break it up into ultra processed and minimally processed. And if we can stay over here on the minimally processed side as much as possible, we're going to see much better results in health outcomes, in health spans of our dogs and our cats. And I know we're specifically talking about dogs here, but the same is true.
The same is true. Yeah. Cat needs a bit more protein, right? Or definitely more protein, than the dog. Okay. So
if we're looking at fresh foods, we're generally thinking, and one of the things that's kind of funny to think about, but people have been so conditioned to say, oh, don't feed dogs human food, right? That's a thing that people think. It comes to their head, oh, don't feed dogs human food. And one of the things that's kind of funny, but I hope it's funny enough that it triggers a little memory every time you hear it, is that, where do you think we get dog food from? Do you think we have to go get it from another planet somewhere? Like, what do you think food is for dogs? So no, we don't necessarily want to feed dogs food that is designed for human consumption, because there's so much ultra processed foods for humans. We don't want to feed that to our dogs.
Yes.
They're really not foods, but we have been conditioned to believe that they are. Same with ultra processed foods. They're actually feed. They're feed grade foods for dogs. Ideally, at the very top of the list is going to be a food that is nutritionally balanced for your dog at whatever life stage they are. Puppies have different needs than adult dogs. That is completely balanced using all whole foods. Now, that is absolutely possible to do, but it is trickier to do today than it was, say, even 60, 70, 80 years ago, because of farming practices, because of monoculture, because of
lots of factors.
Lots of different factors. But it is possible. Below that, you're going to have foods that are mostly whole food based, with maybe a couple, 2, 3, maybe 4 synthetic vitamins or minerals to kind of make up the difference, to make sure we're meeting those nutritional guidelines. Still good, still really good. Then you have this whole class of foods that are technically still considered fresh foods, because you're going to have them frozen or refrigerated, where they have a base of a protein and some vegetables, maybe some fruits. And then you're going to see this huge paragraph of synthetic vitamins and minerals. That is because they were designed from somebody who was trained, generally speaking, in the veterinary field, which is trained by big pet food corporations to believe that you have to have these vitamin and mineral packs to make sure you're meeting. So those are my least favorite fresh foods because of the huge paragraph of vitamin and minerals. And then you get into the ultra processed foods. In between, there is a very, very, very tiny, I can only think of maybe 2 or 3 off the top of my head that I know here in the States are available, where they are balancing with whole foods, but they are air drying it. So you have the convenience of kibble. It's in a bag, it's dry, you're pouring it into a bowl. Hopefully, please, my fingers are crossed, that you're adding moisture to it.
Yes, some water would be good. Yep.
And then that's a very, very, very small, and quite honestly, for a very niche group of people, because you're going to be spending just as much on that food as you would the food in the freezer section.
Right.
And I would much rather you have the food in the freezer section, because it has all of the co-nutrients and the moisture and everything that's supposed to be there. And then you have all of the ultra processed foods. So even
that's kind of dry food.
Yes, they are rendered, they are extruded, they are cooked at such high heats that, first of all, the quality of the ingredient going in, likely very poor. And what you were talking about earlier, the highest, like, I'm buying the best kibble there is, right? Likely the difference there is the quality of the initial ingredient going in. So you have some brands of foods that are buying not just human food waste, but literally industrial waste. And then you have some food companies, those ones that we consider higher quality, that are possibly using some actual, I wouldn't say human grade, but closer to human
Close
grade.
enough. Yeah.
Close enough. Ingredients, regardless of the quality of the ingredient that they start out with, that high heat processing that they do 2, 3, sometimes 4 times, the extrusion process that they do to create those tiny little nuggets, all of that, you're left with virtually no nutrients left back in that product. So that's where they have to add that vitamin and mineral pack back in. So those,
that's kind of the food, what you're describing is kind of the hierarchy of the foods, right? In terms of nutrients. In a way, what gets me thinking is, you remember my grandparents were feeding their dogs scraps, right? Mm-hmm. Basically what happened is they fed them, the leftover whatever meat and the leftover veggies and the leftover rice. And in a way, it almost sounds, when I'm talking to you, it almost sounds that would be the better alternative than a too processed kibble in a low quality, correct?
So in some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. We certainly have these nutrient requirements that pet foods have to meet. They are there for a reason.
Yes.
Most of those reasons are because in one way, shape, or form, a commercial food was put out, it was lacking in something, and animals were harmed. This actually brings up another really good point that I think would be paramount for a new dog owner, for somebody who maybe has never had a pet before. Another thing that people believe that is absolutely not true is that you have to find a food that your dog does well on and feed that food the rest of their life. Please never, ever, 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 ever do that. Rotation is so important. Feeding different things to our pets and to us, so important. So even if you are feeding an ultra-processed food, you're feeding a kibble, I would prefer if you rotated proteins. I would prefer if you rotated brands. I would prefer if every once in a while you're adding some fresh food on top. Because what we know now that we may not have known 50, 60 plus years ago is the importance of our gut microbiome. And depending on who you talk to, between 70 and 80% of our immune system resides in our gut. Same is true for our dogs.
Yeah.
So we need a diverse microbiome to be able to handle everything that life throws at us. We live in a toxic world. So rotation is so important. And the fact that if you were feeding your dog table scraps, they are getting a pretty big rotation. They're also probably getting those raw bones that you cut out of that meat before you cooked it. Yeah. They're probably also getting that, rat in the backyard. They're probably
the natural rotation, right? Yes. Right.
Yes.
So variety, you're talking about variety could be actually one of the answers to the question, what should I feed my dog?
100% variety. In fact, this is harder for me to do as a quote unquote professional. Yes. Most people come to me and they have been so scared by marketing for so long, and they're veterinarian, to be fair, that they have to have every bite of every meal complete and balanced to, here in the States, we use APCO standards, but wherever you live, NRC, FEDIA, whatever it is. And so they're so scared that they want every meal to be complete and balanced to meet that requirement. The reality is that we don't eat off of a spreadsheet. Exactly. Dogs don't need to eat off of a spreadsheet. Neither do our cats. We do need to be responsible and aware that when we're not feeding off a spreadsheet, we do need to be rotating. We need to be including proteins, organ meats, raw meaty bones, seafood, low glycemic veggies. There are lots of things that we do need to include in the diet, but as long as we are including them in a rotation, they're going to be just fine.
Okay, that's great. That's great, Jessica. So in terms of is there a tip you can give to a new dog owner who gets their pup and who has a stressful life, and now this person actually expected to feed this practical kibble in a bowl with a shot of water, and now there's Jessica saying, actually, you should feed fresh. What do you recommend to this person?
So there are some really amazing commercial brands. And of course, depending on where you live in the world, I'd have to do research on what's available to you. Here in the States, as you were mentioning earlier, we have a huge array of amazing, wonderful commercial brands.
Okay.
So instead of going to that big box pet store, wherever you may live, find an independent pet store. Find that tiny little hole in the wall pet store and literally just go to Google and type in independent pet store near me and see what pops up. And if you walk into that store and you see rows of freezers, you're in the right place. And then just talk to those people and say, I'm getting a dog. I know I should be feeding real food to my dog. Point me in the right direction. And you're going to find some really amazing brands. Do check the labels because, again, I'm going to tell you that I would prefer a lot more whole foods on that label than words you can't pronounce, which are generally those synthetic vitamins and minerals.
That's a very good directory just there, right? So that's good. Like, look for the things you understand when reading it, and like skip the foods where half of the label is full of things you don't understand. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And then rotate that. And
yes.
It isn't that difficult, especially if you are feeding out of the freezer. You have to have a little bit of freezer space. You have to have a little bit of fridge space to thaw things out. And even if you don't thaw something out one night, you completely forget, okay, share your dinner with your dog. As long as you don't have onions in your meal,
yeah.
Or you can, as you're cooking your own meal, put scraps aside so that you're not including onions in it. There's not a whole lot more. The actual list of foods that dogs can't have is pretty darn short. Yes. So share your meal with your dog and they're going to be okay for that night.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful. What about cost? I mean, is that not a much more expensive way to feed your dog?
It can be. So if you have the capacity to make your dog's meals, you're going to be able to save a lot of money. I like to tell people two things when it comes to cost. One, I don't care what it is in life that you're talking about. You're either going to have to put time into it or you're going to have to put money into it. And you have to decide which one that is for whatever season of your life you're in. And you don't have to stick to that. You could, for the first year of your dog's life, feed a commercial raw food diet or gently cooked diet and know that you're putting more money into it, but that you don't have the time. And then a year on down the road, when, by the way, they're fully grown, if they're a smaller dog, they're fully grown and you're more confident that you're going to be able to meet their nutritional requirements as a fully grown dog and you have time to put into it, you can switch. And that's okay. Also, one of the benefits of feeding our dogs a fresh food diet, now this is never a guarantee because we have genetics and we have the toxic world that we live in, and there's so many things we could talk about with chemical flea and tick and over vaccination and all the things.
There's lots.
But yeah, those are so many other things we could talk about. But most often people find when you put the time, effort, and yes, money up front into making sure your dog is set up for success, later on down the line, you have a lot less money invested in those vet bills because you're either going to pay now or you're going to pay later. You're going to pay now by putting in good quality nutrition, buying really high quality supplements, doing all of those things versus later on having to pay those really, really high thousands plus dollars of vet bills for these chronic diseases that could actually be the entire life of some dogs. I have sadly way too many puppies right now that I'm working with that are already on really detrimental drugs like Apoquel and Cytopoint. And yeah, it's a shame.
Thank you so much. Actually, this is a very good way to conclude our interview. It took so much time. It was great. Actually, I think there's a richness in what you're teaching here. Is there any way our audience can access your know-how and your knowledge? What can they do and what can they kind of profit from?
Yeah, well, first of all, regardless of what you're feeding, there is a free download available to you for gut health bowl boosters. So these are things you can add to the top of the bowl. Whatever the base of the bowl is, it does not matter. You can add these in. They are specific for improving gut health, which we talked about, the immune system residing in the gut.
Where's that information, Jessica? Where can they find the information?
Yeah, so I know I provided you the link, so I don't know if it'll be like below the video or I don't know.
I can post that. Absolutely, yeah. We'll do that.
And then if you want to reach out to me for a consultation, whether that's nutrition or health coaching, you can go to my website, jessicalfisher.com, and that will lead you to, you can book consultations with me. You can also go to my podcast and learn more and hear from holistic veterinarians about all of this. Whatever.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was so valuable. I have been in this industry for a long, long time. So I have had lots of contacts with a lot of big pet food companies too. So, and I really appreciate your insight. And I think you're on a very good track there to actually allow dogs a very holistic life with a W, right?
Yes, exactly. That's the whole point.
Yes. So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to keeping in touch with you.
Thank you so much, Peggy. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Thank you.